All right, we're doing a news review this week, a news roundup of the top 4 stories you might have missed. And we're going to kick things off with some juicy Kentucky politics that have got folks talking. Could Thomas Massie be eyeing a Senate seat sooner than anyone else expected? We'll get to that in a minute, but first, we'll start with the health news on Mitch McConnell that's stirring things up. There's some real chatter in Cowtown and across Kentucky about whether Thomas Massie could land in McConnell's Senate seat. McConnell has been in bad health for a while. You may have seen McConnell, a 84-year-old Kentucky Republican, had a serious health scare on June 14th when recently we got a audio of a police call. He was found unconscious at his Washington home and was rushed to the hospital. Now, let me read to you straight from the New York Post. Quote, Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, was found unconscious and may have suffered a heart attack in his D.C. residence before being rushed to a local hospital last month, according to a district fire and EMS dispatch call made public Wednesday. The June 14th call referenced medical personnel in a ALS, or Advanced Life Support ambulance, being sent to the home shortly before 9 a.m. and mentioned there was CPR in progress for a cardiac arrest. End quote. Now that's straight from a July 1st report from the New York Post. So this is recent, folks. And his office confirmed to multiple outlets, to multiple people, that he was admitted to the hospital and he's getting excellent care. But they haven't said much more publicly. And admittedly, if you've watched some of the independent reporters, there's one I think named Desiree Townsend that's been doing a really great job in DC. She's essentially camped outside the hospital there, watching the former Senate Majority Leader's security detail come and go out of the hospital, and she's kind of been keeping an eye on him. And from her reporting, it looks like he is still not only in the hospital but in the ICU. Okay, and this comes after myriad health problems with the Kentucky Republican. You may remember in February he was admitted to the hospital for having flu-like symptoms. There was another video of him falling. Of course, about a year or two ago, there was the infamous lockup he had, where he was in a press conference talking about whatever the news of the day was, and he just stopped talking. And Joni Ernst was next to him. Senator, are you okay? And then finally, John Thune, who ended up succeeding him after there was a political coup after that lockup, McConnell was replaced by John Thune, who replaced him in that press conference as well. And so there's been a long history of health problems with senators. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, folks, but senators are not good. They have a little bit of a Biden syndrome. They're not good about leaving office when it's clear they're not in good health. They're not in the position to be leading the country or representing a state in our legislative body. There was Dianne Feinstein, who everyone knew had dementia for many, many years. They couldn't get her to resign. They couldn't get her to resign. Of course, in the House of Representatives, there was Kay Granger, who was living in a memory care while still being a member of Congress. And there's been so many cases of this. Unfortunately, the Senate does not have any mechanism like the 25th Amendment, which allows for the president to be discharged if he has a severely diminished mental capacity for some reason or is otherwise incapacitated. There's nothing like that for the Senate, so there's nothing that can be done. Now, there are ways to expel senators, but it takes a lot of time. And typically it's for some type of misconduct, financial misconduct. I think can't remember if he was resigned or if he was expelled. I know they had started the proceedings to expel him, but Bob Menendez, the Democrat senator from New Jersey, he's the most recent example that at least comes to mind for me. But that was allegations of like gold bars from Egypt or Qatar or something in his house. It's very complicated, very lots of financial alleged misconduct there. Nothing like that that's at least publicly known with McConnell. So the only way for him to leave would be either for him to resign or would be for him to die. Now let's move back to Thomas Massie. Massie, if McConnell resigns or dies, he can't just be appointed to fill McConnell's seat. Kentucky actually changed its state law in 2024. Funny enough, right around the time of that lockup video with McConnell. And now they're one of only 3 states that fill a vacant Senate seat by special election only. The governor makes no short-term appointments. But here's the tantalizing part for Massie. If McConnell does retire or resign or leave in any means before the end of his term, which would be in January of 2027, so January of next year, there would be a special election, and Massie could absolutely run in that seat. And, one inside baseball thing here with politics is, you're going to have to run someone with high name ID. And Massie certainly has high name ID. And they had to spend, Trump's people had to spend a lot of money to defeat Thomas Massie. The AIPAC world had to put a lot of effort behind the scenes and overtly into booting Thomas Massie. So he's obviously someone who's popular, despite the fact that he recently lost the primary for his congressional seat in Kentucky. So he's someone that's a formidable force in the state, and he's someone that would probably have a following. There are a lot of Republicans in Kentucky, but very few with the national recognition that he has. I mean, maybe the only other would be Rand Paul, and he's already a senator. So and the governor of Kentucky is a Democrat, Andy Beshear. So there's no natural statewide recognized counterpart to run for that seat. So we'll see what happens. Massie has been asked. Desiree Townsend actually asked Massie about whether he would run in a special election for that seat. He has so far chosen not to comment. Interesting. So he's not denying it, which would be pretty easy to do if you had no intention of doing it. But maybe they're just waiting for to see what happens with Mitch McConnell. Okay, now we'll move on to our next segment, birthright citizenship. So, of course, we did several stories on it. Cowtown did on the birthright citizenship ruling earlier this week. I'm sure that was a disappointment to many of my listeners. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 on statutory grounds that the children of illegal aliens and of temporary visa holders, such as H-1B workers, do have citizenship under the 14th Amendment. The court also made a similar ruling affirming that 5-4 on constitutional grounds. And immediately, the president put out a post on Truth Social, and he said, the Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship, which is too bad for our country. But we can easily make it up in Congress through legislation. Congress should start today to work on ending expensive and unfair to our country birthright citizenship. They will have my complete and total support, end quote. And Vice President J.D. Vance, in an interview with Laura Ingraham, called the ruling a major, major mistake. And he also supported some legislative fix here. Now, let me read to you a few key details from a recent report from the Hill. Okay, so Senator Rand Paul has introduced a constitutional amendment that would limit birthright citizenship to children born here with at least one parent who is a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, or on active military duty. Okay, now, this is me breaking away with commentary. That's an interesting idea that Rand Paul has introduced. I am not convinced it's going to work because takes a lot to get a constitutional amendment passed. You know, it's not just a majority in the House and Senate, with which the Republicans barely have anyway. But you know, I think it's what, like 2/3 of the Senate and 3/5 of the House or something like that. You have to get something like that. You have to get to pass the constitutional amendment. The votes aren't there. The votes just aren't there. Okay, so constitutional amendment, which is one of the only things that can overturn a Supreme Court ruling on a constitutional matter, doesn't seem likely, but okay, kudos to Rand Paul for trying. Representative Andy Ogles, here's another thing, also been widely reported in a press release. He has introduced the Anchors Away Act, of course, Anchors Away being a reference to anchor babies, which would ban pregnant foreign nationals from entering the United States specifically to give birth here. Here's my commentary. Interesting idea, banning pregnant foreign nationals from coming in. Um, I would argue that that's probably a misguided policy. How are you going to know? How are you going to know if a alien coming into the country is pregnant? I mean, sometimes you can look at a woman and tell that she's pregnant. Sometimes she's just fat. Sometimes she's just a heifer, okay? You know, and sometimes, especially in the early months of pregnancy, they either may not know, or if they do know, they're not showing. And so it would be very hard to one, even establish who is pregnant, and then establish who has the intent to come here to give birth. Another thing, and I might write a column over this. One thing the president could do by executive fiat, and this has been reaffirmed by the Supreme Court so many times, he could just deny admittance to women. No more Chinese chicks. No more Chinese chicks. We're not having any more Chinese chicks. They gotta go. They gotta go. You know, like, okay, so H-1B visas are like overwhelmingly men. They're like 75% male or something. But they have a spousal visa, which is the H-4 visa, and that's how wives and kids come here. And like almost 100% of H-4 visas are women. They're like almost entirely women, okay? It's like 95% or 93% or something. Just stop issuing H-4 visas. Don't issue the visas to the wives. Don't issue them to their daughters, you know, because a daughter can get an H-4 visa until she's the age of 21. So just stop issuing visas, you know, don't admit women to the country. And you might be sitting there going, okay, wait. Wouldn't like it be easier just to say like women who aren't of birthing age, you know, like maybe women who are younger than 10 and older than 60 or something like that. Okay, they can get in. No, because they're going to cook the documents. This happens all the time with India. You may remember there was a compliance audit with H-1B visas in 2008, and they found that more than 1 in 10 contained fraudulent material. They will just get fraudulent documents, okay? You know, a 15-year-old will suddenly become 10 according to the documents, you know. And you know, a 35-year-old woman will suddenly become 55. And with Chinese women, that's going to be really hard to tell because they look 10 until they're 60 and then they look 100, okay? So it's very hard to tell. And it's not just China, although they are probably the most egregious abuser of our visa programs. You know, John Sauer told the Supreme Court that, according to Chinese media, there are 500 birth tourism agencies in China whose job it is to get pregnant women here and to have them give birth. In Saipan, which is a former part of Imperial Japan that we took after the war, and still belongs to us. It's a U.S. territory now. In Saipan, I think one year in the 2010s, 70% of the births in Saipan were to Chinese birth tours, okay, according to the New York Post. I remember that because I previously reported on it. So that, you know, it's not just China. You know, other countries do it too. There have been reports that there is similar practice. There is a similar practice going on in India with them coming here. And of course, irrespective of whether there is birth tourism going on, it is an incentive for an H-1B worker. Like if he gets a job in the US, his kids can get citizenship here just by being born here, and so that's every reason to get married and bring a wife over, or to try and get a job in the US altogether. So just stop issuing visas to women. Very easy, very easy. And okay, maybe make a few exceptions on the margin, like with an O1 visa, which is for like athletes, scientists. The whole O class of visas is like for scientists, athletes, movie stars. If Nicole Kidman needs to come here, and she always plays young mothers in movies. If there's some movie that needs a young mother, they can get the aged Nicole Kidman here, on an O1 visa. Okay, we'll make an exception for her. But generally speaking, no visas for foreign women. And I think we would solve this issue overnight. It could be solved. The president could do it tomorrow. The Supreme Court reaffirms in Trump versus Hawaii. And then some of the other decisions handed down earlier this week. Decisions about immigration are like entirely in the president, with foreign aliens overseas on foreign soil. Decisions about immigration are like entirely discretionary. The president can stop anyone. He could stop redheads. He could stop the left-handed. He could stop people with a lisp. He could stop, people who didn't have green eyes, or, could only have people with green eyes or only blue eyes or whatever. The president can do whatever he wants with foreign aliens on foreign soil. This would be an easy, easy, easy fix. There's no need for the legislative action here. I mean, it would be great to codify something like that, but the president could do this tomorrow. He doesn't have to wait. Senator Bernie Moreno, going back on topic, I digress. Back on topic, Senator Bernie Moreno has announced a plan to reintroduce the Immigration Stabilization Act that was first introduced by former Democrat Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid in 1993, and it targets birthright citizenship for kids of illegal immigrants, and also gives stronger enforcement against smugglers and employers of illegal aliens. Bernie Moreno, the Republican senator from Ohio, is of course doing this to see if the Democrats, who were recently led by Harry Reid, he retired when Obama was president, they're obviously trying to see if they will still vote for a bill that many of them were around for in the early 1990s, but we will see. Now, down in Texas, of course, State Senator Lois Kolkhorst is going to have a hearing on July 8th at the Capitol on foreign exploitation of the surrogacy industry in Texas. And her committee's digging into how outside interests may be taking advantage of Texas law. That's all we know so far. Now, there has also been a new op-ed from the Wall Street Journal by Professor Richard Epstein. He's a famous legal scholar, one of the most cited of all time, and he's taking the Supreme Court to task for the birthright ruling. I'm just going to read briefly from this and then we'll move on. Epstein writes that Chief Justice John Roberts, in his opinion, quote, wholly failed to explain how his flawed originalist methodology supported birthright citizenship for the children of illegal aliens or temporary visitors. He criticizes Roberts for collapsing the language that has to do with subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Quote, the Chief Justice incorrectly collapses the two into one by writing that the citizenship clause uses jurisdiction in its ordinary sense, referring to the power of the United States to govern those within its territory. In Epstein, okay, end quote, Epstein draws on a lot of historical distinctions like local allegiance versus natural allegiance to say that the clause was never meant to cover kids of temporary visitors or those owing primary allegiance to a foreign power. And he raises the exact concerns about birthright tourism that Trump and others have raised. It's a very interesting op-ed. I'll link to it in the show notes below this. It's getting a lot of traction. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis tweeted it, the outgoing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And I wonder why. I wonder why. He's going to be out of a job in a few months. He has a law degree. I think he's still in his 40s. So he's young. Wonder if he's looking for a job. Just something to think about. I'm going to change the order of the stories we have here and move on to NPR reported, speaking of Supreme Court retirements, NPR reported that Justice Alito was retiring. This was reported about 5-10 minutes after the birthright decision was released, and it was a total head scratcher and in the media world, and a big oops for NPR on Tuesday. They published a story saying Alito was retiring, and then they yanked it. Okay, now I'm going to read directly from the New York Times report on this. The New York Times reported NPR on Tuesday retracted an article that said Samuel Alito, an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, had retired. The editor's note that replaced the story after being taken down read, "Earlier today, we erroneously published a story that the Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito was retiring. He has not announced his retirement, and we've retracted the story." So the story was by Nina Totenberg, who's a veteran reporter. I think she's been around 40 or 50 years. And she had said that it was a pre-written piece expecting an announcement. She later went on All Things Considered and read her full personal apology to Justice Alito, which I'm going to read to you because it's so weird. It's so weird. Okay, it's not very long. She says, quote, "Dear Justice Alito, there are no words to adequately apologize for today's error in reporting your retirement. It was entirely my fault. I rushed out of the courtroom after the opinion announcement, and when I realized that the usual rush of folks after a few minutes had not happened, I asked somebody what was going on inside, to which the answer was retirement announcement. I didn't hear the S on retirement announcements, and I assumed something no reporter should ever do, that you were retiring." NPR's editor and okay, so end quote. NPR's editor in chief called it a misunderstanding. They issued an on air correction, blah, blah, blah. The story was live for only a few minutes, and then it was taken down. Okay. There's something more going on here. There's something more going on here. You don't you don't publish a story that Alito is retiring. You don't publish something that big without checking off your dotting all your I's and crossing your T's. I wonder, some people are saying that they think Alito may have leaked that information at that time to figure out where the leak was in the Supreme Court. If there are leakers in the Supreme Court, because obviously they had that problem before when the opinion for Dobbs, of course, being the case that overturned Roe versus Wade, was leaked, or a draft, I think, of Alito's opinion was leaked. Was this another test, to see if there were leakers? I just don't see Nina Totenberg doing this. No journalist. I know journalists that are in the early part of their careers who don't have a good sense of ethics, who might do this. I don't see anyone with Nina Totenberg's experience doing this. I just don't. Something more has happened here, okay? I think she was fed some bad information, and that's actually kind of becoming a practice in the media recently. I have seen people feed some bad information to the press recently. It's sort of, I don't know what the motivation is, but perhaps to discredit the outlets, or perhaps to get a reaction out of people and then see what you're going to do next after the information breaks. But something is going on here because I just don't think someone like Nina Totenberg would make that mistake. Okay, now here's some good news. We're going to end on a good note, because it's almost the 4th of July. At the time of this recording, it's July 2nd. So this podcast will go out later today. Hopefully, you'll listen to it before you check out for a few days and enjoy your time with your family. Ford, the car manufacturer, has flipped on AI, and they are, quote, bringing back the graybeards. Okay, now let's show that let's step back and appreciate that sometimes humans are just better than a little tech. Ford is reversing course on some of its AI and automation pushes by rehiring hundreds of experienced operative word, American engineers. The company had leaned hard into automated quality systems, but as anyone who works with AI knows, it wasn't getting the job done. So they've reportedly brought back about 350 veteran, quote unquote, graybeard engineers, many of them former Ford workers or suppliers over the last 3 years. And these guys are, unfortunately, they're training the AI and mentoring younger workers and fixing problems that the computers missed. Okay, now I'm reading directly from a Bloomberg report on this. Quote, over the last 3 years, Ford has said it has rehired 350 veteran engineers, many of them former employees and others from suppliers, to help address seemingly intractable quality woes. Ford's chief operating officer noted that they had been relying more and more on automated quality systems with disappointing results, so they brought back technical specialists, end quote. And one Ford, well, one Ford, his name is Chuck Poon. There's a joke there somewhere. But Chuck Poon said, artificial intelligence is a fantastic tool, but it's only as good as the information you trade it on, end quote. So Ford's given up on AI, at least for right now. They're trying to make it better, using humans to make it better. But that should be a heartwarming story for all Americans. That it turns out the big companies are getting a little bit skeptical of AI. The one thing, and I don't know, I was having a conversation about this last night with someone else I know who works in media, and we were both saying it lacks judgment. It doesn't have a sense for horse smarts, street smarts. It'll do a lot of silly things, and it can write an email for you, certainly. But any big project, AI just doesn't know what to do. And certainly when you're a big company like Ford, you got a lot of money on the line. You need people who know what they're doing. Now, apparently Ford just topped JD Power's quality rankings for the first time in 16 years. So, they bring back the graybeards and suddenly quality goes way back up. Okay, remember that, America. Remember how good American workers are. You know, Companies recently have been in love with H-1B labor and they've been in love with AI, but there's really nothing quite like an American worker. And other companies reportedly are following suit. Bloomberg, some other outlets noted that IBM has quietly started increasing hiring after some AI experiments didn't fully replace human judgment, and a few other companies have been reported as doing the same thing. So I think that is a very, very, very good sign for American workers. AI is just not quite there. No one's ever going to work as hard as an American. No one's ever going to have the talent and expertise of Americans. And it's, even if momentary, wonderful that companies have been forced to recognize that a little bit and, put some money down, put some Americans back to work. All right, that's the end of our news wrap for this week. That is the latest straight from Cowtown Caller. I thank you for listening. If you have thoughts about any of these stories, I encourage you to comment wherever you receive your podcasts. Comment on the Substack app, comment on YouTube. You can also find me on Twitter at Cowtown Caller. Give me your thoughts. I would love to hear what you think about AI and what you think about the potential replacement of Thomas Massie in Mitch McConnell's seat. Sounds very interesting. I'd love to hear from you. All right, good night and good luck.